The ocean has always been a place of beauty and danger, where calm waters can suddenly turn into scenes of chaos. From surfers dragged beneath waves by great whites to sailors trapped after storms with circling predators, each story reveals how quickly survival can hang by a thread. Kayakers, divers, trainers, and even families on leisure trips have all faced moments when the sea reminded them of its true power. Some escaped with scars and haunting memories, while others never returned at all. These accounts show that beneath the surface lies a force no one can ever fully control. On August 17, 2022, the warm waters near Gansby glistened as a private yacht carried a lively group of 25 friends celebrating the birthday of a young British traveler named Emily Saunders. At just 22, she was known among her friends for her adventurous energy and bright spirit. Raised along the southern coast of England, she had grown up surrounded by the ocean, spending summers swimming, sailing, and collecting shells along the shore. Her fascination with the sea had followed her into adulthood, where she often joined friends on beach trips and coastal getaways. For her birthday, she dreamed of something unforgettable, and the South African coast, famous for its beauty and marine life, seemed the perfect place. Emily's companions filled the deck with laughter, music, and daring games. They were a mix of close friends from home and travelers she had met along the way, all gathered to make the day one to remember. The group took turns leaping from the bow in playful dives, clinging to ropes strung from the mast, and testing their balance on inflatable flamingos drifting near the yacht. Spirits soared higher with each stunt, the crowd cheering and clapping as the sea became their playground. The atmosphere was lighthearted and joyful, carrying a sense of being far removed from worry. For a while, the water seemed peaceful, reflecting only the laughter above. Beneath the surface, however, the currents carried a far darker presence. Great white sharks often patrolled these waters, drawn by seal colonies and schools of fish that passed near the rocky coast. Yet to those on deck, danger felt distant, hidden beneath the wide stretch of blue. As the games continued, the yacht rocked gently, and Emily leaned casually over the side, her feet dangling in the cool water while her friends gathered around her. It was a moment of simple joy, a quiet pause amid the laughter and noise. The stillness shattered in an instant. From below, a massive 16-foot great white exploded upward with terrifying speed. Its jaws clamped around Emily's legs, the force yanking her from the deck before anyone could react. A scream broke across the celebration as she was dragged into the sea, her body thrashing as the predator pulled her beneath the surface. Blood streaked the waves, spreading rapidly through the water, turning the once bright celebration into chaos. Friends lunged to the railing, some hurling objects into the sea, others splashing and striking the water in frantic attempts to distract the predator. The great white thrashed violently, its tail cutting wide arcs across the surface, pulling Emily deeper as the crowd screamed in terror. Inflatable toys toppled, drinks spilled across the deck, and the music cut into silence, replaced by shouts of panic. Within seconds, she was gone beneath the red churn, swallowed by the sea's violence. The stunned group stood frozen, the laughter of moments earlier erased by the raw power of a predator they could not fight. At that moment, the party had transformed into a nightmare, and the sight of the massive fin slicing the water left every witness trembling. The calm ocean had turned savage, and survival had been claimed in a matter of seconds. The sea churned with silence after the predator vanished, leaving only crimson streaks and shattered calm. Emily did not resurface, and her companions stood paralyzed at the railings, unable to accept what had just unfolded. Moments earlier they had cheered, but now every face was drained of color, the sound of the ocean overtaken by cries of disbelief. Objects floated in the water, pieces of inflatable toys drifting aimlessly, reminders of a celebration that had turned to horror in seconds. The crew radioed for assistance, their voices strained with urgency as they sent out distress calls to nearby patrols. Within minutes, rescue boats sped across the water, sirens cutting through the air. Trained responders scanned the surface, sweeping the waves with nets and spotlights, yet the depths yielded nothing. The current had already carried traces of blood away, spreading a haunting trail that stretched beyond the yacht. Divers prepared with caution, but the risk of the predator's return made every second in the water perilous. Only fragments of fabric and splintered wood were recovered, all that remained of a moment now lost to the deep. On deck, the passengers collapsed into clusters of shock, some trembling uncontrollably, others staring into the endless horizon. A few clung to each other, soaked in tears, while others pressed their hands over their faces, struggling to process what they had seen. The yacht that had moments earlier been filled with laughter now echoed only with sobs and silence. The party decorations fluttered weakly in the wind, a sharp contrast to the grief that weighed heavily on every soul aboard. When the vessel returned to port, word of the tragedy spread faster than the tide. Crowds gathered along the pier, murmuring in disbelief as authorities guided the survivors onto land. Journalists arrived quickly, their cameras flashing against pale faces streaked with saltwater and tears. Officials confirmed the predator was a massive female, one of the largest seen in the region in years, drawn close to shore by seasonal movements of seals and baitfish. Safety officers warned of the dangers of reckless stunts in known predator zones, stressing that even brief contact with the water could trigger an attack. For Emily's family back home, the loss was devastating. Calls of condolences flooded in, while social platforms filled with tributes, photos, and memories of her bright spirit. Yet the absence of recovery left grief unresolved, deepened by the knowledge that the sea had claimed her completely. For her companions, the memory of that day would never fade. The laughter, the music, and the sudden violence became etched into their minds as a reminder of how quickly joy can collapse into tragedy. The celebration that was meant to mark life ended instead as a sobering lesson. The sea had shown its raw power, leaving scars on every witness and a silence that would echo for years to come. On April 9, 2025, the warm waters off the Florida coast shimmered in the morning sun as U.S. Coast Guard Petty Officer Cade Thorne prepared for another difficult day on duty. At 32 years old, Cade was no stranger to risk. He had joined the service a decade earlier, driven by a desire to protect lives and safeguard those who found themselves in peril at sea. Raised in a small coastal town, he had grown up with salt in his lungs and an instinctive respect for the ocean's strength. Over the years, he built a reputation as a calm and steady rescuer, someone who could be trusted in moments when fear threatened to overwhelm others. Fellow sailors admired his strength and persistence, but it was his quiet determination that truly defined him. That morning, his team was called to a capsized vessel not far from the shoreline. A mother and her young son clung desperately to floating debris, their bodies weak from exhaustion. Cade was assigned to secure them, a task that required him to lean close to the water and extend the buoy. The waves rocked gently, but beneath the surface, unseen danger waited. The area had seen unusual predator activity in recent weeks, though the mission left little room for hesitation. As Cade stretched out his arm to steady the child, the water erupted with terrifying speed. A massive tiger shark, over 13 feet long, surged upward from the shallows. Its jaws clamped viciously onto his right leg, dragging him beneath the surface in a swirl of foam and blood. The shock was immediate, pain tearing through his body as he struggled to stay above the waterline. The predator pulled with immense power, determined to hold its grip, its striped body twisting violently below. Cade refused to release the buoy. He clung to it with all his remaining strength, using it as a barrier to keep from being pulled fully under. Kicks and frantic jerks bought him small moments of space, but the weight of the predator threatened to drag him deeper. His blood spread quickly, a dark cloud that drifted into the current and heightened the frenzy. The crew above reacted instantly, throwing emergency lines and striking the surface with poles to distract the predator. Splashes and sudden movements cut through the waves, drawing the animal's focus for brief seconds. The sea boiled with turbulence as Cade fought for his life, his grip on the buoy the only shield between survival and disaster. The rescue team's desperate actions created just enough chaos to shift the balance. With one final violent thrash, the predator released him, leaving him bleeding heavily and trembling as the crew pulled him back toward safety. Cade's body was hauled aboard the vessel, his leg torn and bleeding as crew members rushed into action. Thick cloths were pressed tightly against the wound, each layer soaking through almost instantly. His face had gone pale, his breath shallow, and every moment felt critical. The deck became a frenzy of motion, sailors grabbing medical kits, applying tourniquets, and keeping pressure on the injury. The water that still streamed from his gear carried streaks of red, reminders of how close the sea had come to claiming him. Nearby, the mother and her young son were lifted onto the boat as well, trembling and exhausted, but alive. They clutched one another as medics stabilized them, their ordeal overshadowed by the sight of Cade fighting to remain conscious. The boy was wrapped in a blanket, his small frame shivering from shock, while his mother wept in silence, unable to process how their rescue had nearly turned into another tragedy. The crew moved with urgency, coordinating both rescues at once, determined not to lose anyone. The vessel sped toward shore, its engines roaring as waves struck hard against the hull. Cade was strapped securely, saline lines inserted while medics worked to slow the bleeding. Each minute dragged as the team kept their focus on keeping him alive until they reached land. The mother and child sat nearby, staring at him in quiet fear, understanding that the man who had saved them was now paying the price of his bravery. At the dock, paramedics were already waiting. Cade was carried swiftly to the ambulance, his uniform torn, his body trembling from trauma and blood loss. Sirens blared as the vehicle rushed to the nearest hospital, every bump sending waves of pain through his battered frame. In the emergency room, surgeons worked for hours, cleaning and stitching deep lacerations while repairing torn muscles and vessels. His survival came down to speed and the relentless work of those who refused to give up on him. News of the attack spread quickly, sparking concern across coastal communities. Authorities confirmed that predator activity had been higher than normal in the region, pointing to unusual movements of baitfish and seal populations that had likely drawn the shark closer to shore. Officials warned crews to remain cautious, reminding the public that even trained rescuers faced extreme risks in unpredictable waters. For Cade, the aftermath carried both scars and weight. His leg, though badly damaged, was saved, but recovery would take months of therapy and patience. More than the physical wounds, the memory of being pulled under during a mission meant to save others would never fade. For his team and the family he rescued, his courage became a symbol of the dangers faced at sea and the strength required to face them. On June 8, 2025, the waters off Monterey Bay rippled with early morning light as a U.S. Navy vessel anchored for scheduled equipment testing. Among the crew was Petty Officer Liam Cross, a 28-year-old diver with years of disciplined training behind him. Raised in a military family, Liam had grown up with stories of service and responsibility shaping his ambitions. His dedication to physical fitness and precision earned him respect within his unit, and he often volunteered for difficult assignments that tested both skill and nerve. Calm under pressure, he was known for his focus and strong sense of duty. This mission, though routine on the surface, would soon challenge those qualities in ways he could never have expected. The team entered the water to inspect sonar arrays and supports, their movements precise and steady. Sunlight cut shallow beams through the surface, while the quiet hum of equipment carried faint vibrations into the sea. For divers like Liam, the work required patience and awareness, as predators were known to inhabit these waters. Still, the crew pressed forward, scanning each detail of the submerged structures while maintaining tight formation. It was then that a shadow emerged from the deep blue. A massive great white, nearly 16 feet long, rose beneath the vessel with unmistakable power. Its first movements were abrupt and unsettling, striking at nearby arrays and stirring the water with violent thrashes. The divers tightened their positions, their eyes following the predator as it circled with growing aggression. The animal's broad body cut arcs around them, each pass bringing it closer, its movements deliberate and menacing. The tension sharpened when the predator rammed one of the arrays with bone-shaking force. Metal rang against water, and the divers scattered back. Liam steadied himself near a support beam, bubbles rushing from his gear as he tried to keep calm. The shark continued to circle, snapping its jaws within feet of the team, its presence dominating every motion in the water. In a sudden burst, the predator lunged. It closed the distance with terrifying speed, jaws clamping down on Liam's right forearm. The force tore through his wetsuit, teeth sinking into flesh as blood poured into the current. Pain exploded through him, but training kept his focus sharp as he kicked hard and thrashed, trying to wrench himself free. His fellow divers reacted instantly, striking the water with poles and tools to distract the predator. The scene became chaos as Liam's body twisted under the predator's violent pull. Blood clouded around them, mixing with foam as every second stretched into a desperate fight between survival and the sea's most feared hunter. The predator's grip finally loosened as the relentless strikes from nearby divers created enough distraction. Liam's body twisted free, and he pushed upward with his remaining strength. The water above glowed faintly with sunlight, but every kick felt weaker, his arm torn and bleeding heavily. Around him, red clouds drifted, painting a trail through the sea as the shark turned away, circling wider arcs, but keeping close enough to remind the team that danger had not vanished. His teammates moved fast, pulling him toward the surface with urgent strokes. Their training showed in the precision of their actions, each diver forming a barrier between Liam and the predator as they guided him upward. The ascent felt endless, bubbles racing around them, the sound of rapid breathing filling helmets. At the surface, crew on deck hauled him over the side, his body collapsing onto the steel with a thud that echoed against the vessel's hull. Blood poured freely across the deck, staining gloves and uniforms as medics rushed in. Layers of bandages pressed against the mangled arm while fluids were prepared to fight the loss. Liam's skin was pale, his eyes half closed, but his pulse still beat steadily. Around him, the team stood shaken, their wetsuits streaked with red, their bodies trembling from both cold and adrenaline. The great white lingered below, its dorsal fin breaking the surface briefly before vanishing again into the dark waters. The vessel sped toward shore, engines roaring against the swells. Every jolt sent fresh pain through Liam's body, but the medics worked tirelessly, wrapping and securing his wounds. Radios crackled with updates to shore teams, preparing an emergency landing zone. For those on board, silence fell heavy, broken only by the sound of waves and the occasional moan of the wounded diver. At the port, ambulances waited, whisking him into surgery as quickly as possible. Hours of careful work closed deep gashes, stitched torn tissue, and stemmed blood loss. His survival owed as much to training and preparation as it did to the swift actions of his crew. In the aftermath, Navy officials released statements about unusually aggressive great white behavior in the region. Experts explained that sonar vibrations and splashing could provoke sudden responses from predators, even against trained personnel. For the team, the memory of that day would remain etched in their minds, a stark reminder that no level of preparation could erase the risks of working in waters ruled by apex hunters. On July 12, 2018, the sun blazed over Darwin as 17-year-old Kai Thompson joined his group of friends at the riverbank for an afternoon of fun. Kai was well known in his community as a lively teenager who loved adventure. Growing up near the coast, he had spent most of his weekends outdoors, climbing trees, fishing, and swimming with friends. His parents often described him as full of energy, always eager to try daring stunts. That afternoon, the rope swung over the shallow river had become the perfect place to show his fearless side. Friends laughed and cheered as they took turns launching into the water, the air filled with playful shouts and splashes. To them, it was nothing more than a harmless summer escape, far removed from any thought of danger. The water, however, held a hidden threat none of them could see. Beneath the murky surface, a large bull shark glided slowly, drawn close to the river mouth where baitfish often gathered. Known for their aggressive nature and comfort in shallow waters, bull sharks had been spotted in the region before, but few expected such a predator to be so close on that day. The group above the water remained unaware, focused on laughter and the joy of watching each other swing out and splash down. Kai, with his usual boldness, grabbed the rope, ready to take a long swing into the river. He launched himself into the air, the rope pulling taut before he released, plunging into the shallows with a loud splash. For a few seconds, the water bubbled with energy, ripples spreading outward. Then, in a sudden explosion of movement, the predator struck. The 10-foot shark surged from the shadows, its powerful jaws clamping down on Kai's leg with terrifying force. The water churned red as the predator yanked him beneath the surface in one swift motion. Panic tore through the group on shore. Friends screamed, splashing wildly as they rushed to the water's edge, desperate to reach him. Some threw sticks, others leapt in, pulling at the waves in a frantic attempt to scare the predator away. But the strength of the shark was overwhelming. Kai's body vanished deeper as the water thrashed violently. Every second felt like an eternity as the group's cries echoed across the riverbanks. The once playful scene had turned into chaos. The rope swing hung still against the tree as the splashes and laughter were replaced with terror. In those moments, the river revealed its hidden danger, leaving his friends frozen in horror, powerless against the predator's strength. The struggle had only just begun, but the outcome would soon deliver devastating loss. The riverbank grew crowded within minutes as the sound of panic carried across the area. Locals who had heard the commotion rushed forward, scanning the water with wide eyes. Some dived in, hoping to find a trace of Kai, while others shouted for emergency services. The river, murky and restless, offered no sign of him except for faint ripples drifting downstream. The predator had disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only silence and shock. Rescue teams arrived soon after, launching boats into the water while searchers moved along the banks. Nets were dragged through the current, and spotters scanned from every angle. But the powerful flow of the river carried little evidence. Minutes turned into an hour as the crowd stood frozen, clinging to fading hope. Finally, several kilometers downstream, Kai's body was recovered, his injuries confirming the brutal force of the attack. The loss struck those gathered with a wave of grief too heavy to bear. Authorities moved swiftly to secure the area. Officials explained that the week had seen unusual bull shark activity near river mouths due to shifts in tides and feeding patterns. The shallow stretch where the teenagers had played was a known hotspot, yet the warning signs had gone unnoticed. Police urged residents to avoid unsupervised stunts in such waters, stressing the deadly risk of mixing human activity with predator-rich environments. For Kai's friends, the weight of guilt and sorrow was crushing. The laughter and joy of the afternoon replayed endlessly in their minds, overshadowed by the image of their friend pulled beneath the surface. Families from the nearby town came together in mourning, laying flowers by the riverbank and holding vigils under the same tree where the rope swing still hung. The rope was later removed, a silent acknowledgement that the place would never again be seen as harmless. The tragedy became a stark reminder across the community. Schools and local groups held assemblies about water safety, and experts gave talks on the behavior of bull sharks in rivers and estuaries. Parents grew more cautious, warning children never to swim in murky waters without supervision. While officials reinforced safety measures, the emotional scars ran deeper than any rules could reach. Kai's story spread beyond Darwin, carried in news reports as a chilling example of how quickly ordinary fun could turn deadly. His memory lived on among those who had grown up with him, his name tied forever to the day the river revealed its hidden danger. On September 16, 2024, the sea off the Bahamas churned under the force of a violent storm that swallowed the horizon. Among the sailors caught in its grip were Rafael Dominguez, a 34-year-old fisherman from Cuba, Hector Salazar, a 37-year-old sailor from Mexico, and Nico Marlowe, a 29-year-old deckhand from Florida. Each of them carried years of experience at sea, but the storm they faced that day was unlike any routine squall. Rafael had grown up in Havana, the son of a boat mechanic, and he had spent much of his life navigating unpredictable waters. Calm under pressure, he was often seen as the anchor in any crisis. Hector, older and broad-shouldered, was known for his endurance and strength, qualities that made him reliable in heavy seas. He had left behind a family who knew well the dangers of his work. Nico, the youngest, had taken to life at sea for adventure. Though less seasoned, his energy and quick thinking often made him invaluable during tense moments. That afternoon, the storm struck their vessel without mercy. Towering waves slammed across the deck, tearing apart equipment and snapping ropes. Within moments, the men were thrown from the safety of the ship into the furious sea. Saltwater filled their mouths as they fought to reach pieces of scattered debris. Each man clung to floating planks and crates, their bodies battered by the surf. Exhaustion set in quickly, the cold water draining their strength as the storm continued to whip across the ocean. The sea calmed only slightly after the storm passed, but the danger had not ended. As the three men struggled to stay afloat, another threat emerged from below. A dark shadow cut through the swells, its dorsal fin slicing across the surface with terrifying precision. It was a 9-foot oceanic white-tip shark, an apex predator notorious for appearing when humans were most vulnerable in open water. The predator had been drawn by the scent of blood from their storm injuries and the frantic movements of their splashing limbs. The shark circled with eerie patience, its pale fins glinting as it moved around the sailors. Every pass tightened the knot of fear in their chests. Rafael gripped a floating crate, his knuckles pale from the pressure. Hector swung a broken piece of wood into the water, hoping to deter the animal. Nico, clinging desperately to his own debris, kicked hard to keep his body above the waves. Then, in an instant, the predator lunged. Its jaws clamped down on Nico's shoulder with brutal force, tearing into flesh and fabric as the water erupted in foam. The crate he clung to shattered under the assault, splinters scattering in every direction. Blood poured into the water as the shark dragged him beneath the surface, his body twisting in its grip. Rafael and Hector, panicked but determined, splashed and swung wildly at the predator with fragments of debris shouting into the storm-heavy air. Nico reappeared moments later, gasping, his shoulder torn and bleeding freely. The predator circled again, its broad fins carving through the waves as if testing the men. The ocean became a battleground, every second stretching thin as the three sailors fought not only against exhaustion and hypothermia, but also against one of the sea's most relentless hunters. The shark made another pass, brushing close enough that its rough skin scraped across Raphael's leg, leaving him trembling. The men pressed together around the largest piece of debris they could find, striking the surface with frantic energy. For minutes that felt eternal, the predator tested them again and again, its eyes fixed on the wounded. The attack was far from over, and their survival balanced on the thin edge of time as the storm's aftermath gave way to an even darker struggle in the open sea. The predator lingered near the sailors, circling with slow determination, each movement stirring the debris around them. Nico clung weakly to what remained of his crate, his shoulder bleeding heavily, while Raphael and Hector tried to shield him with whatever scraps they could hold. Their arms ached from constant motion, the salt stinging their wounds, yet they knew stillness might invite another strike. The ocean had grown quieter since the storm, but that silence felt hostile, broken only by the splash of the shark's fins slicing through the waves. Minutes dragged on, and the men were caught between fatigue and dread. The predator circled again, closing the gap, but Raphael swung a broken plank against the surface with every ounce of strength he had left. The sound, sharp against the water, seemed to disturb the animal just enough to slow its advance. Hector pressed closer, steadying Nico with one arm while trying to keep his head above the swells. Each breath became a struggle, the effort of clinging to life consuming what little strength they had left. At last, distant engines cut across the sea. Rescue crews dispatched after the storm scanned the wreckage for survivors. The sailors spotted the faint shape of the boat approaching, and desperation gave them a final surge of strength. They flailed their arms, waving frantically despite the weight of exhaustion. The predator still lingered nearby, pacing in wide arcs, as though unwilling to surrender its claim. The rescuers drew closer, their shouts muffled by wind and waves, and threw bright flotation devices toward the men. The commotion distracted the predator for precious moments, giving Raphael and Hector the chance to drag Nico closer to safety. Hands reached down, pulling first Nico, then Hector, and finally Raphael aboard the rescue craft. Their bodies collapsed on the deck, trembling and soaked, but alive. The crew moved quickly, pressing heavy bandages against Nico's torn shoulder and wrapping Hector's bleeding arm. Raphael sat slumped, his chest heaving, his mind reeling with the memory of the dorsal fin that had circled them so patiently. Relief washed over them, but the sight of red-stained water still clinging to their bodies reminded them how close they had come to death. Back on land, ambulances waited to carry them to treatment. Nico was rushed into surgery to repair muscle and tissue shredded by the predator's teeth. Doctors praised the quick actions of his companions, noting that without their frantic defense he might not have survived long enough to reach help. Hector and Raphael, though less severely injured, were treated for deep cuts, bruising, and exhaustion. Their recovery would take time, not only for their bodies but for the heavy memories of the sea. News of the ordeal spread quickly, sparking warnings across coastal communities. Experts explained that oceanic whitetips often appear after storms, drawn by drifting debris and injured prey, making post-storm waters especially dangerous. For the three men, the experience left scars deeper than flesh. They had gone to sea prepared for rough waters, but not for the relentless patience of a predator that had turned survival into a battle against both nature and time. On August 12, 2025, the waters of a marine park near Vancouver shimmered beneath the morning sun as a crowd gathered for a behind-the-scenes training session. Among the trainers working that day was 27-year-old Elena Ramirez, a dedicated marine specialist who had built her career around working with large aquatic mammals. Raised in coastal Spain, Elena grew up in a fishing town where she spent hours watching the ocean. Fascinated by its mysteries, she later pursued studies in marine biology before moving abroad to gain hands-on experience with dolphins, seals, and eventually orcas. Over the years, her skill, patience, and gentle nature earned her respect among colleagues. She believed in strengthening trust with the animals she worked with, though she also understood the risks that came with close interaction. The orca paired with Elena that morning was a 12-foot male, a powerful young adult known for its unpredictable energy. Trainers had worked with him for years, but his sheer strength meant sessions required focus and precision. Elena had prepared her tools carefully, reviewing the day's schedule of target signals and reinforcement techniques. For her, the routine was familiar, another chance to strengthen the bond between human and animal, while educating onlookers about the ocean's most iconic predator. As the session began, the orca moved with fluid grace through the pool, its black and white body cutting sleek arcs beneath the surface. Elena leaned near the water's edge to deliver a signal, her hand poised to guide the animal closer. Spectators watched with anticipation, unaware of the tension that could shift in an instant when working with apex predators in captivity. Without warning, the orca surged forward. Its massive head struck Elena's chest with stunning force, the blow sending her staggering backward. Before she could regain balance, the animal opened its mouth, clamping down on her leg with terrifying precision. The jaws, lined with sharp teeth, locked briefly as the predator twisted, dragging her violently beneath the surface. Water exploded in foam as Elena struggled to break free, her body spinning under the sheer power of the animal. She kicked frantically, bubbles streaming from her mouth as she reached for anything to hold on to. The crowd gasped in horror as trainers on deck scrambled into action. Elena's hand found a floating barrier, and with desperate force she clung to it, her body shaking from the crushing grip of the predator. The orca released briefly, circling back as if preparing for another strike. Trainers struck the water with poles, creating noise and splashes, while others dumped buckets into the pool to distract it. The animal twisted again, but this time the barriers held it at bay, giving Elena the moment she needed. She was pulled toward the side of the pool, gasping and trembling, her wetsuit torn and blood staining the water around her. Hands reached down, dragging her onto the deck where she collapsed, her chest heaving as red streaks spread across her bruised body. The predator sank back into the depths of the pool, its black dorsal fin slicing through the surface with chilling calm. The audience fell into stunned silence. What had begun as a routine session had turned into a terrifying reminder of the raw force contained in even the most familiar captive predators. Elena lay bleeding, in shock as her colleagues rushed to stabilize her. The attack was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. Elena lay stretched across the pool deck as trainers worked frantically around her. The towels pressed against her leg quickly soaked red, and her chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. The orca's sudden strike had left her body battered and her mind in shock, yet she clung to consciousness as emergency medics hurried in. Within moments, she was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, every movement precise to avoid worsening the injuries. The atmosphere that had been filled with excitement minutes before was now heavy with fear. The arena transformed into a scene of controlled panic. Spectators were ushered out quickly, many still in disbelief at what they had witnessed. Some whispered in fear, others clutched children tightly, while staff guided them toward the exits. Trainers remained behind, shaken and pale, their eyes fixed on the animal that still circled in the pool with unsettling calm. The orca's sleek black and white body glided effortlessly beneath the surface, its dorsal fin cutting sharp arcs as if nothing unusual had happened. The contrast between the chaos on the deck and the predator's silent rhythm was haunting. As the ambulance rushed Elena to the hospital, staff members gathered in stunned silence. Many had worked with her for years, and the attack left them questioning everything they believed about their routines. The animal was moved into a separate enclosure where specialists monitored its behavior. Reports noted that it seemed restless, occasionally slamming its tail against the water in bursts of aggression. The trainers avoided eye contact with the pool, their focus fixed on the fate of their colleague. At the hospital, surgeons immediately began working on Elena's wounds. Her leg had suffered deep punctures where the orca's teeth had clamped down, and her ribs were bruised badly from the impact of the strike. Hours of surgery stabilized her condition, stitching torn muscle and closing large lacerations. Doctors explained that while she would survive, recovery would be long and demanding, involving weeks of rest and months of physical therapy. She also faced emotional challenges as memories of the violent pull underwater were certain to linger. News of the incident spread rapidly, reaching headlines across the world. The story shocked both animal lovers and critics of captivity, sparking debates over the safety of close-contact programs. Marine biologists explain that while orcas are intelligent, they are also apex predators with instincts that cannot be fully suppressed in controlled environments. The sudden aggression, they said, could have been triggered by stress, confinement, or simply instinctual behavior. Advocacy groups called for stricter safety regulations and questioned whether humans should engage so closely with such powerful creatures. For Elena, the aftermath stretched far beyond the hospital walls. She carried deep scars across her leg, and each breath reminded her of the force that had slammed into her chest. The pool where she once worked with confidence was now tied to images of violence and fear. Her recovery became as much about regaining strength as it was about finding peace after such a traumatic event. The Marine Park launched an urgent investigation. Safety protocols were rewritten, barriers reinforced, and all close contact sessions suspended indefinitely. Trainers were required to maintain a greater distance during sessions, and new emergency equipment was added around the pools. Yet even with these changes, the memory of the attack weighed heavily on staff, many of whom questioned whether they could ever view their work the same way again. For visitors, the incident changed perspectives as well. What had once seemed like a thrilling spectacle was now seen as a dangerous gamble, with forces too powerful to fully control. Parents hesitated to bring children, and some vowed never to watch such displays again. The orca that had attacked Elena became a symbol of both beauty and danger, a reminder that wild instincts remain even in the most controlled settings. Elena's story grew into something larger than one moment of violence. It became a warning about the limits of human control and the risks of working with predators whose strength far exceeds ours. Her survival was seen as both a miracle and a message, proof that while humans may admire and study apex predators, they can never truly tame them.